Today it felt like the walls were closing in, pressing the air from her lungs. She picked up the photograph with trembling fingers. Sarah stood outside a restaurant, smiling at the camera. She wore the blue dress Elena had bought her for her 18th birthday last month. The man behind her, Dominic, wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking down at Sarah's neck, the same way he'd looked at Elena's neck 40 years ago, right before he'd shown her what he really was. Elena's stomach lurched. She gripped the counter to steady herself. The shop bell chimed. Mrs. Chen shuffled in, her usual Tuesday visit for mysteries. "Eleanor, dear, you look dreadful," Mrs. Chen said. She'd known Elena for 15 years and still used the false name Elena had adopted after fleeing. Elena forced her voice steady. She slid the photograph under a stack of invoices. The new Ruth Rendell came in yesterday. Her hands moved on autopilot, wrapping the book in brown paper. Her mind screamed. Sarah was 18, the same age Elena had been. Dominic had found them. Mrs. Chen paid and left. The bell chimed again, too loud in Elena's ears. Elena pulled the photograph back out. She studied every detail. The restaurant behind them had a green awning. That was only 3 miles from here. He was in London. With Sarah. Elena's daughter didn't know the truth. How could she? What mother tells her child that her father is something out of nightmares? That he doesn't age, doesn't die, and feeds on things Elena still couldn't name without her throat closing up? She'd kept Sarah safe by running, by hiding, by never speaking his name. But Sarah had turned 18 last month, and now Dominic had found her. Elena turned the photograph over. The letter opener was still on the counter. Elena picked it up. Her reflection stared back from its tarnished silver blade. An older woman with frightened eyes. She'd been 18 when Dominic had shown her his true face on their wedding night, when he'd explained what he was, what their marriage meant, what he would eventually need from her. She'd run before he could complete whatever ritual he had planned. Disappeared into London's crowds, changed her name, had Sarah in secret and raised her alone. 40 years. She'd had 40 years of borrowed time. But Dominic hadn't aged a day. In the photograph, he looked exactly as he had in 1983. The same dark hair, the same sharp features, the same ageless beauty that had made 18-year-old Elena ignore every warning her gut had screamed. Now he stood behind her daughter with that same predatory grace. Ready for what? Elena's hands shook as she reached for her phone. She needed to call Sarah, warn her, but warn her about what? That the handsome man she'd apparently met was Elena's husband from 4 decades ago? That he was hunting her for reasons Elena still didn't fully understand? Sarah would think she'd lost her mind. The shop bell chimed again. Elena's head snapped up. A man stood in the doorway, tall, dark-haired, impossibly beautiful. Lord Dominic Ashford smiled at his wife. "Hello, Elena," he said. His voice was silk over broken glass. Elena's hand hovered over her phone for 3 full minutes. The photograph lay beside it on her kitchen table, a ghost made of paper and ink. She had to warn Sophie. But how could she explain without sounding insane? She picked up the phone, put it down. Her daughter would think she'd lost her mind. The truth was impossible to speak aloud. No, that wouldn't work. Sophie barely tolerated their monthly calls as it was. The distance between them had grown wider each year, a canyon Elena had dug herself through decades of careful silence. She dialed before she could change her mind. Sophie's voice carried that familiar edge of impatience. "Is everything okay?" Elena kept her voice steady. "Have you met anyone new recently?" A pause. "What? No. A man might try to contact you. He's dangerous, Sophie." Sophie's tone shifted from impatient to dismissive. "I'm 28 years old." Elena's throat tightened. She heard typing in the background. Sophie wasn't even giving her full attention. "Please, just listen." The typing stopped. "Ashford." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Elena's feet. She gripped the table edge. "He came by the gallery yesterday." Sophie's voice warmed with professional pride. "He knows an incredible amount about pre-Raphaelite art." The word came out too sharp, too desperate. "Sophie, you can't." Her daughter's voice went cold. "And how would you know that?" Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She had met him. She had married him. She had fled from him 73 years ago, though she looked barely 40 now. But she couldn't say any of that. I know his family. Sophie's laugh held no humor. You mean the Ashfords who donated £3 million to the British Museum last year? Sophie's voice softened slightly, the way it did when she thought Elena was having one of her episodes. Look, I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine. Adrian is perfectly charming. Adrian, he was using a different first name now. Of course he was. Dominic Ashford had died in 1952, at least on paper. Elena had read his obituary in the Times, a small notice about a reclusive aristocrat. She should have known he'd simply reinvent himself. Elena hated the pleading in her own voice. Something bitter entered Sophie's tone. You've kept secrets from me my entire life. You won't talk about my father? You moved us 7 times before I turned 10. Sophie sighed. I have to get back to work. Sophie, wait. The line went dead. Elena sat in the silence of her flat, the phone still pressed to her ear. Above her, footsteps creaked across the floorboards. Mrs. Chen's cat meowed. Normal sounds of a normal building. But nothing was normal anymore. Dominic had found Sophie, and Sophie had no idea what was coming. Elena looked at the photograph again. His message was clear. He knew where her daughter worked. He'd already made contact. And dinner tomorrow night meant she had less than 24 hours. She couldn't protect Sophie from a distance. Not anymore. Elena stood and walked to her bedroom closet. Behind the winter coats, behind the boxes of old books, was a small leather case she hadn't opened in decades. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. Inside were things she'd hoped never to use again. A silver knife with symbols etched into the blade. A vial of water from a church in Prague. And a wedding ring she'd never been able to throw away. She had run for 73 years, but running time was over. The taxi driver refused to take Elena past the village gates. He shook his head, eyes fixed on the road ahead. I'll drop you at the old crossroads. Elena didn't argue. She paid the fare and stepped onto the cracked pavement. The driver pulled away before she'd even shouldered her bag. The moors stretched out before her, vast and brown under a gray sky. She'd forgotten how empty Yorkshire could feel. How the wind here didn't just blow, it pushed, like invisible hands trying to turn you back. She started walking. The path to Ashford Manor had been gravel once, now weeds grew through the stones, but the route was still clear. Someone had walked this way recently. The grass was trampled down. Fresh footprints marked the muddy patches. Elena's chest tightened. She told herself it was just hikers, teenagers exploring the abandoned estate. Nothing more. But she knew better. The manor appeared suddenly, rising over a low hill. Elena stopped dead. It shouldn't look like this. 40 years of abandonment should have left it a ruin. Broken windows, collapsed roof, walls crumbling into the earth. Instead, Ashford Manor stood perfect. The stone walls gleamed as if freshly cleaned. The windows caught the afternoon light, whole and unbroken. The gardens were wild, yes, but not dead. Rose bushes climbed the south wall, thick with late autumn blooms. Someone had maintained this place. For 40 years, someone had kept it alive. Elena's hands went cold despite her gloves. She forced herself forward. The front door was unlocked. It swung open at her touch, hinges silent and well-oiled. The entrance hall took her breath away. Everything was exactly as she remembered. The black and white marble floor, the crystal chandelier hanging from the vaulted ceiling, the portrait of Dominic's grandfather above the fireplace, his painted eyes following her across the room. No dust covered the furniture. No cobwebs hung in the corners. The air smelled of wood polish and something else, something familiar that made her stomach turn. Dominic's cologne, the same scent he'd worn in 1983. This isn't possible, Elena whispered. Her voice echoed in the empty hall. Empty, but not abandoned, never abandoned. She moved deeper into the house. Her footsteps on the marble sounded too loud. Each room she passed was the same, perfectly preserved, impossibly clean. The library still held Dominic's books, arranged by subject just as he'd liked. The drawing room still had her embroidery hoop by the window seat, a half-finished pattern frozen in time. Elena picked up the hoop with shaking hands. The fabric was soft, not brittle. The thread was still bright, not faded by decades of sunlight. She set it down quickly as if it had burned her. The kitchen was modern. That stopped her cold. Everything else in the house was period appropriate, stuck in 19... 1983, but the kitchen had been updated. A new refrigerator hummed in the corner. The stove was electric, not gas. A coffee maker sat on the counter, still warm to the touch. Someone lived here. Recently. Possibly still. Elena opened the refrigerator. Milk, dated from 3 days ago. Fresh vegetables. A bottle of wine, half empty. Her pulse hammered in her throat. She climbed the stairs to the second floor. Each step felt heavier than the last. The bedroom doors stood open along the corridor. Guest rooms perfectly made up. The bathroom spotless and waiting. At the end of the hall was the master bedroom. Their bedroom. Elena's hand trembled on the doorknob. She pushed it open. The room looked exactly as it had the night she fled. The four-poster bed with its dark curtains. The wardrobe where she'd kept her clothes. The vanity where she'd brushed her hair each night while Dominic watched from the bed. But there were new things too. Photographs lined the mantelpiece. Elena crossed the room, drawn forward despite her fear. Her breath caught. They were all of her. Hundreds of them. Taken over 40 years. Elena at the grocery store in Manchester, 1987. Elena walking Sophie to school, Nepal, 95. Elena at her daughter's graduation, 2003. Elena in her garden last summer, pruning roses. He'd been watching. All this time he'd been watching. Elena spun around. Dominic stood in the doorway. He looked exactly the same as the day she'd left. Not a gray hair, not a wrinkle. 28 years old forever, while she'd aged into a woman of 68. He smiled. It was the smile she'd loved once, before she understood what it meant. "Hello, Elena," he said softly. The door swung shut behind him. The lock clicked into place. Elena heard it like a gunshot in the silence. The library smelled of old paper and something else. Something sweet and rotten. Like flowers left too long in a vase. Elena pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped inside. Dust hung in the air, visible in the thin streams of moonlight. The curtains were drawn, but gaps in the fabric let silver beams cut through the darkness. She'd always loved this room. Now it felt like a tomb. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined every wall, thousands of books pressed together, their spines cracked and faded. In the center stood a massive reading table. Papers were scattered across its surface, as if someone had left in a hurry. Elena crossed to the table. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floor. The papers were old, very old. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Dominic's grandfather had written these. She'd seen his journals before. Years ago, when she'd first come to the manor as a bride, she picked up the top sheet. The ink had faded to brown, but the words were still clear. "The curse requires blood," unless not just any blood. It must be female. It must be 18 years of age. Elena's stomach dropped. Her hands shook as she set down the paper. She grabbed another sheet, then another. Each one said the same thing in different words. The Ashford family had been cursed 300 years ago. A woman scorned, a promise broken, a price demanded. Every generation the curse claimed one life. Always a girl, always at 18. And Dominic, Lord Dominic Ashford, was the keeper of the curse. He didn't age, he didn't die. He simply waited, again and again, for the next sacrifice. Elena spun around. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Dominic stood in the doorway. He looked exactly as he had the day she'd fled. Tall and lean, with dark hair that curled at his collar. His eyes were the same deep brown she remembered. His face hadn't changed at all. Not one line. Not one gray hair. Nothing. "You haven't aged," Elena whispered. Her voice cracked on the words. Dominic stepped into the room. He moved with the same grace he'd always had, like a dancer, like a predator. Elena backed away from the table. "I thought you were just—" "I don't know," but Dominic's voice was soft, almost gentle. Elena's back hit the bookshelf. She had nowhere else to go. "The curse," she said, "these papers. They say it needs a girl, 18 years old." Dominic stopped 3 feet away from her. Elena's mind raced. She thought of the photograph. The girl with her eyes and Dominic's dark hair. The girl who looked exactly like Elena had at 18. "But you had a child with someone else," she said slowly. Dominic shook his head. The room tilted. Elena grabbed the shelf behind her to stay upright. That's impossible. I would have known. I would have. You were pregnant when you ran, Dominic said. You didn't know yet. It was too early. Elena's knees went weak. She slid down the bookshelf until she sat on the cold floor. The words felt strange in her mouth. Dominic crouched down in front of her and his eyes were sad, almost human. You gave her up for adoption. You never told her about me. Dominic reached out and brushed a strand of hair from Elena's face. His fingers were cold. I've been waiting. The curse requires 18 years. Elena jerked away from his touch. No, that's not. I would have remembered. You were in shock. You just learned what I was. You ran without thinking. Dominic stood up. You named her Sarah. Sarah Thorne. Sarah, the girl in the photograph. The girl who looked like Elena's ghost. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Dominic walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. Moonlight flooded the room. Sarah will be drawn here. She won't understand why. She'll simply feel the pull. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Elena pushed herself to her feet. Her legs felt like water, but she forced them to hold her weight. I won't let you take her, she said. Dominic turned to face her. For the first time, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or regret. I've been waiting for you to say that, he said quietly. The drawing room felt smaller than Elena remembered. The walls pressed in like the sides of a closing fist. Lord Dominic Ashford stood by the fireplace, his back to her. The flames cast his shadow across the floor. It stretched toward her feet like a dark stain. You found the journals, he said. Not a question. Elena's hand tightened around the strap of her purse. Inside, her phone felt heavy. One call to the police. That's all it would take. But what would she say? That her husband from 30 years ago hadn't aged? That he'd been alive for centuries? Her voice came out steady. Good. She needed that. Dominic turned. In the firelight, his face looked carved from stone. Beautiful and cold. Safe, he moved towards a side phone, poured amber liquid into 2 glasses. But it's the truth. She's here, at the manor. Elena's heart kicked against her ribs. The chapel. She'd been married there. White dress, red roses, a ceremony that felt like a dream. She should have known then. Should have seen the wrongness in his eyes. She stayed near the door. Escape route clear. Dominic held out a glass. Elena didn't take it. He set it on the table between them. The same age you were. The room tilted. Elena grabbed the back of a chair. Dominic drank from his own glass. His hand was steady. Every generation, one woman from the bloodline. She comes to the manor. Elena's mind raced. Bloodline, generation. The words felt like puzzle pieces, but they wouldn't fit together. Dominic's voice was flat, matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. Before she married your grandfather, she lived at Ashford Manor for 3 years. Then your mother. The word came out harsh. My mother died when I was 5. Dominic set down his glass. From 18 to 21, then she left. Met your father, had you. The curse allows that much. 3 years of service, then freedom. Elena's legs felt weak. She sat. The chair was hard beneath her. Dominic moved to the window, looked out at the dark grounds. Bound by blood to this land, to this manor. We cannot leave, cannot die, not truly. The pact requires a keeper, someone to tend the grounds, to maintain the wards. The thing beneath. Elena remembered the cold spot in the library, the feeling of being watched. Dominic's reflection in the glass looked tired, ancient. It's been here longer than the manor, longer than the Ashford name. My ancestor made a deal. Power and immortality. The price was service. Elena's voice shook now. She couldn't stop it. Dominic turned. His eyes met hers. For the first time, she saw pain there. Real pain. Without them, we become like the thing below. Hungry. Hollow. The women anchor us. 3 years. Elena stood. Her chair scraped against the floor. Sophie doesn't know. Dominic's jaw tightened. Born of this curse. He serves it too, but he's young, foolish. He thought he could love her. Dominic's hand curled into a fist. He broke the rules, tried to take her away. The manor won't allow it. He's somewhere in the grounds now, lost. Elena's phone buzzed. She pulled it out. A text from an unknown number. Help me. Chapel. Sophie. Elena held up the phone. Dominic moved toward the door, opened it. But the pact is already in motion. She's been here 3 days. The binding has begun. If she leaves now, before the 3 years are complete, the curse will follow her, hunt her. It will take someone else from the bloodline. Elena's blood went cold. I have a niece. Dominic's face was stone again, unreadable. The curse always knows. It counts the bloodline like a miser counts coins. Sophie stays, or the next one comes. The fire crackled. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Elena looked at the text again. 3 words, a plea for help. She thought of her mother, her grandmother, all the women before. 3 years of their lives traded for what? To keep monsters human? To feed something ancient and hungry? Take me to her, Elena said. Dominic nodded. He led her into the hallway. Their footsteps echoed on marble floors. The manor seemed to breathe around them. Alive. Watching. The chapel was at the east wing. Elena remembered the way. Some paths, once walked, are never forgotten. The stairs went down forever. Elena counted each step to keep from screaming. 23, 24, 25. The stone walls pressed close on both sides. Her candle flame threw wild shadows that danced like living things. Cold air rose from below, carrying the smell of earth and old blood. You don't have to do this, Dominic said behind her. His voice was soft, careful. Elena didn't answer. She'd found the hidden door behind the library shelf an hour ago. The same door she'd discovered 40 years back, when she was still young and foolish enough to think love conquered all. She'd been wrong then. She might be wrong now. But Sophie didn't deserve this. No 18-year-old girl deserved to be bound to a monster for eternity. The stairs ended. A wooden door stood before them, carved with symbols that hurt to look at. The same symbols from the book. The same ones that had marked her wedding night. Dominic's hand touched her shoulder. She jerked away. She pushed the door open. The chapel spread before them like a wound in the earth. Candles burned in iron holders along the walls. Their light revealed stone benches, an altar draped in red cloth and chains hanging from the ceiling. Sophie stood at the altar. Her white dress looked like a burial shroud. Adrian held her hand, his face blank and empty. He looked like Dominic had looked on their wedding night, beautiful and hollow. Mrs. Holloway stood beside them, holding an old leather book. The housekeeper's eyes met Elena's. No surprise showed there, only resignation. You came, Mrs. Holloway said. Elena walked forward. Her legs shook, but her voice stayed steady. Mrs. Holloway gestured to Adrian. The curse requires balance. A Thorne woman for an Ashford man. Elena laughed. The sound echoed off the stone walls. My duty? To be food for him? Mrs. Holloway's voice hardened. Your grandmother understood. Your mother understood. Sophie whimpered. Her eyes were glazed, unfocused. Whatever drug they'd given her was wearing off. Soon she'd understand what was happening. Soon she'd scream. Elena had screamed too, on her wedding night. No one had come. There's another way, Dominic said quietly. He moved to stand beside Elena. I can end this. Mrs. Holloway shook her head. You tried that before. The curse won't let you die. He looked at the altar. The binding stone. Elena stared at him. That's what you're not saying. His silence was answer enough. How noble, Mrs. Holloway said, but you won't do it. The housekeeper smiled. Elena's chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to say she'd gladly watch him die, but the words stuck in her throat. 40 years she'd hated him. 40 years she'd run. But standing here, seeing the weariness in his eyes, she remembered something else. She remembered the man he'd been before the wedding, before the curse took hold, the one who'd read poetry to her in the garden, who'd promised to love her forever. He'd kept that promise. In his own twisted way, he'd kept it. There's a third option, she said slowly. Dominic's hand gripped her arm. She looked at Mrs. Holloway. That's what you really want, isn't it? The original bond restored. She pulled free of Dominic's grip. The bond never broke. It just stretched. But I can come back. Mrs. Holloway's eyes gleamed. Yes. Let Sophie go. Let her forget all of this. Elena's voice didn't shake. Sophie stirred. Her eyes focused on Elena. Recognition dawned, then horror. She whispered. The word hung in the air like smoke. Elena's world tilted sideways. Dawn broke over Ashford Manor like a wound opening in the sky. Elena stood in the chapel garden where Dominic had led her. The ancient stones formed a circle here. Moss covered their surfaces. She could smell wet earth and something older. Blood soaked into ground over centuries. Sophie waited at the circle's edge. Her granddaughter's face was pale but determined. Elena had explained everything during the long night. The curse, the choice, what it would cost. You don't have to do this, Sophie said. Her voice shook. Elena took her hand. Dominic stood across from them. The rising sun didn't hurt him. That was just a story people told. But something about daylight made him look more tired, more human. He'd changed from his formal clothes into something simpler. A white shirt, dark trousers, like he was going to work in the garden instead of completing a blood ritual. The curse needs 3 things, he said. His voice was quiet. Blood, consent. Lena's heart beat faster. You could have taken my blood 40 years ago. Dominic looked at her directly, but not your consent. The morning wind moved through the garden. It carried the scent of roses from the manor's east wall. Lena remembered planting those roses. She'd been 19. Dominic had helped her dig the holes. His hands had been warm despite what he was. I don't understand, Sophie said. If you needed her consent, why let her leave? Dominic smiled. It was sad and small. Because love without choice isn't love. Elena felt something break open in her chest. Not pain, something else. Understanding, maybe. Or grief for all the wasted years. You protected us, she said. The pieces were fitting together now. Every time Sophie got sick. Every time I had money troubles. Dominic's eyes met hers, in sickness and health. For richer or poorer, you left me, Elena. Sophie made a small sound. Elena squeezed her hand tighter. The curse feeds on family lines, Dominic continued. It would have taken Sophie eventually. Then her children, then theirs. The only way to end it was for you to choose freely to return. Elena's mouth was dry. You'll be bound to Ashford Manor. To me. Dominic pulled something from his pocket. A small silver knife. Its blade caught the dawn light. You won't become what I am. Elena looked at Sophie. Her granddaughter's eyes were wet with tears. There has to be another way, Sophie said. Elena's voice was steady now. But it's okay, I'm old, sweetheart. I've had my life. She crossed the stone circle. Each step felt heavy, final. Dominic held out the knife. Elena took it. The silver was cold against her palm. I consent, she said clearly. I offer my blood freely. I bind myself to Ashford Manor and to Lord Dominic Ashford. She drew the blade across her palm. Blood welled up, dark and red. Dominic caught her hand in both of his. His skin was cool, gentle. He pressed her bleeding palm against the central stone. The ground shuddered. Elena felt something vast and ancient wake beneath them. The stone drank her blood. It drank her choice. It drank 40 years of running and came away satisfied. Then it was over. Elena's legs gave out. Dominic caught her. He lowered her carefully to the grass. Sophie ran to them crying. It's done, Dominic said softly. The curse is broken. Elena looked up at him. The sunrise lit his face from behind. He looked like the man she'd married. Young and hopeful and terribly, terribly lonely. 40 years, she whispered. Dominic brushed hair from her face. Sophie held her grandmother's other hand. The 3 of them sat in the stone circle as the sun climbed higher. The curse was gone. The price was paid, and Elena Thorne had finally stopped running.